you've heard me mention culture shock a few times. And culture shock is the sense of being very disoriented and in an unfamiliar place, but then feeling this sense of dread, right? You're sitting in a place where you don't know the people, you don't know the culture, and you feel sort of stuck and you feel alone. And these are the common feelings that people have when they feel really disoriented in a new culture. And things that make a difference, right, is surrounding yourself with things that are familiar, right? So making sure that you follow a routine. And if you find a favorite restaurant or a favorite cup of coffee, that you build a routine so that you start to build relationships and connections with people, which is so important. And culture shock isn't a permanent state, and particularly if someone is willing to do the work to try to overcome it. And it's not always severe for everybody. There are going to be times when it feels a little overwhelming. It feels overwhelming here in the United States some days, but it's not unique to our lives. It's just that we expect certain things to be comfortable and normal, and or what we consider to be normal, and it may not be your norm right away. But eventually you build a cycle into your life, and you build a comfort into your life with your new routine and your new friends and new ways of doing things. And then you become immersed in the culture. And then often it can be just as challenging to exit the culture because you've become so adapted to it, because you've become so comfortable with it. So it is a cycle. It is not an unexpected cycle. Typically, it starts with a little bit of euphoria at first, and then there's a little culture shock, and then you start to make the adjustment, and then you normalize. And all of that is to be expected. It's a fairly common cycle of behaviors. Um, so understanding this before you go into an expatriate assignment is important, and making sure those around you recognize when there are going to be these challenges to help you then to make the adjustments needed. So making sure you do cultural training is going to, again, be some of the most important things you can do to help an expatriate adapt. As people relocate, they need different kinds of support. Obviously, the cultural training, as we've talked about, but also there are some compensation issues, right? We need to adapt compensation so that at least people can afford to live comparably. So if you're moving to a higher cost of living area, there will be a temporary adjustment to your pay so that you can live comfortably in that new location. It is often capped and it is often temporary, and it's agreed to that it'll be temporary. So you might need to have a 10% increase in pay because the cost of living is more expensive, say, in London than it is in St. Louis. And so you go to London and you get that increase in pay, and then when you come home, that increase will go away. And you'll be back to whatever your normal standard would be for that particular area. And obviously, there's all sorts of different kinds of support. There's move support, there's apartment support, there's home support, there's housekeeping support, there's helping move your family and finding schools and helping spouses find jobs and all sorts of options that are available out there. And there are vast expatriate networks in all countries. And so tapping into that, often they're part of Facebook. I know you may not like Facebook, but that's a great source. It also could be Discord, but also there may be international groups that you hear about through the embassy that are ways for people to connect with each other. The goal is find those connections, and the organization should be familiar with them if they're used to getting expatriates come in. So they know, right, there are these social groups and these social networks and Americans abroad and, all sorts of different names of groups that can help people to make that adjustment and give you a sense of familiarity with people who may come from your home country, but at the same time, they're partners in crime to go out and explore new areas and go sightseeing and go on trips together and get to know your new home country for a while. Um, Sometimes you can use a global relocation service, and they are kind of the whole thing, right? They work with movement, they work with training, they work getting families oriented and up to speed. They pre-screen families to know where the strengths and weaknesses might be in terms of the kind of support you'll get from your family. Global relocation companies are really fabulous, and a great resource. The CoreFlex plan or the CoreFlex idea is that every expatriate has a unique need and unique skills and strengths and weaknesses. And so we have to adapt what we do for our expatriates based on what they uniquely need. So we don't want to assume that a one size fits all is going to manage how someone is going to get to a new country and be able to adapt there. So that CoreFlex plan is a plan that we utilize to make sure each person gets a custom setup that meets their needs based on their context and their experiences. And as we said, right, there are going to be pay differences. There's going to be compensation differences. There's going to be policy differences, assuming that it's kind of a more dispersed, decentralized approach to things. Educational assistance to help people put their kids in schools, housekeepers for people to clean your home for you. How many weeks or months a year do you get to come home and be with your family and have that time, or have them come visit you? Particularly if it's a very short-term project, then you may not want to uproot your family. And you may just want to travel back and forth on a regular basis in order to be able to meet those needs. But again, compensation is important, making sure we've got good pay, and that people can have the type of lifestyle that they're used to at home to do that abroad, particularly if the cost of living is so much higher. Risk management is also very important for people who are abroad, particularly if you're in an area where crime is different than we're used to. In some areas, there's a lot more begging and there's a lot more criminal behavior going on, simply because if it's a community full of poverty, you're going to have requisite increases in crime because of that. So making sure that they understand the safety rules, how to take care of themselves, how to be safe, how to know what the law enforcement can and can't do for you, what are the gun laws. Some countries have very strict gun laws, and you may not be able to bring your guns with you if you have guns. Having a pet, that may be something that can be done, and having a pet that can be your companion, but also can provide security and safety for you. Making sure that you are living in places that are safe, that are structurally sound, because if you are going to a place where there might be natural disasters, um, hurricanes, tornadoes, cyclones, flooding, fires, whatever would be the norm, we want to make sure we're protecting people accordingly. There are unique challenges for women and other marginalized groups, for example, LGBTQ plus employees, because often there is institutionalized sexism or heteronormativity, and it may even be illegal in some countries to be gay. So in those countries, yes, the work needs to get done, and yes, this person may be the best person to do it, but they have to be incredibly careful, or they could end up in jail, and they may never get out, depending on where they go. So preparing people, making sure they're fully aware of what they can and can't do, or should or shouldn't do, um, making sure that women get the support they need doing expatriate assignments, because often they experience sexism in cultures that they may not necessarily experience here at home. I remember a number of years ago, I worked for a software company that sent consultants to Japan. And this was in the late 80s. And you would think, well, we're sending consultants to Japan and we can send the best person there and it shouldn't be a problem. But the problem was the best person for the job was a woman. She was a great documenter for documenting how to use software, to document the usage of it. So she was really great at writing and really great at understanding the flow of the software and how it's supposed to behave. But she could not go to Japan because at the time, Japan did not respect women in the workplace, and they had a very clear masculine view of gender roles. So women stayed at home and men worked. Now women are much more involved in everyday life. This is 35 years ago we're talking about, right? So we had to send her subordinate, but that subordinate had his hands tied because he couldn't make a lot of decisions until he actually talked to the expatriate, to the woman back in the home country, to get approval for things that needed to be done when he was doing business with Japan. So that kind of sexism hasn't gone away. It still exists. It may be more subtle nowadays, but it's out there. So making sure that we've got good organizational and family support for women who are doing these kinds of assignments is also really important. Repatriation is important because, again, you're very likely to experience reverse culture shock. Um, and coming back to the States, you're used to a certain level of autonomy or the way that you were treated. And when you return with a plethora of experience, you still get treated the same way you were before you left when you didn't have that experience. And so sometimes it is challenging to return to a workforce and to get the increased respect that one would expect to get from having some advanced experiences. A lot of organizations don't do a good job of repatriating people, and unfortunately, that creates a turnover problem. And we don't want to lose these people because we've just sent them abroad to get broad experience, to bring our expertise to another country. And for us to then do that would be a really challenging thing. So our goal, of course, is to figure out how to make that transition back home as smooth as possible, whether it's a financial issue or a culture shock issue or sort of an administrative issue or just recognition. Recognition is important. Learning, expecting people to tell us what they learned and then giving them the opportunity to practice it. We talked about that in training. Think of expatriate assignments as a big training program. So we need to make sure that the work that they've done and the things that they've learned can be utilized back in the home country again. So if you don't want to do a long-term relocation for your employees, there's a couple of alternatives. And one is short-term assignments where you go and you're only there for a few months and then you come home for a while and you might go back again later for a couple more months. So it's an exchange back and forth. So this way there's not a huge disruption to someone's life. You don't have to uproot the family to follow you there, to deal with educational issues and family related issues. Other things can be simply doing extended business trips where you might go for a couple of weeks and then come home for a couple of weeks and then go back for a couple of weeks. So you might go back and forth with more frequency so that your stays there are not extended. You don't need to be renting an apartment, but you can stay in an Airbnb, temporarily for a couple of weeks and then you come home and then you go back again. Then we can also do what we call cross-border commuters, where Monday through Friday they are working in the location, the different country, and then they come home on the weekends. Now, this works when it is more local. Like if it's Mexico, yeah, it's easy. If it's Canada, it's easy, right? London, maybe, but you've got time distance when you're traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, so you may have some challenges there. And the same thing if you're going obviously westward to Asia, and things like that. So cross-border commuters only makes sense if the border is not so challenging and the time to get home, the distance to get home is not too difficult. Because this way, at least it gives people an opportunity to be home. The last thing you want is for them to come home for a short weekend, have jet lag, and then have to pick up and go back again. So we don't want to do it where there's going to be where there's long distances to travel. The last group of folks that can be an alternative to a long-term relocation is what we call a digital nomad. This is a kind of a new trend, and you can get visas to be digital nomads in a lot of different countries, and basically it's remote work. You live in another country, but you work remotely for a home country. So you might work back and forth. You might do consulting work. You might work online. Um, it doesn't matter. But you're doing remote work, and you get to live in another country, but still do work for the home country to the best of your ability. The employer of record um, is the person is the employer, even if they're working abroad. They're still considered the employer of record, um, and that you get paid according to that. Um, Accommodating our employees to be able to do global nomad or digital nomad is really, really awesome. This opportunity would be great to live in another country, to get all the wonderful immersed experiences of living in another country. Um, and also, the company doesn't have to worry about repatriation and getting you back home and what those transitions can do, or worrying about culture shock and things like that. It's like, I'm already living here. Let me come work for you remotely, and then we can make that work. So looking into digital nomad opportunities is a great way to live abroad if you want to and still work domestically.